This week on Culture Leaders Daily, we bring you my conversation with Doug Merritt, the chairman, CEO, and president of Aviatrix. I really love talking to Doug. He has a fascinating philosophy about life that informs his entire style of leadership. And when I spoke to him, I feel like something clicked, something I have been trying to figure out about my entire career that he answered so eloquently. First of all, he said there's no such thing as failure, just opportunities for learning. And his employees are not beholden to outcomes, but to showing up every day, building habits, and putting in the work. And when something doesn't go to plan, he'll take the feedback and build it into a plan for tomorrow. It's something we talk about all the time, taking accountability for what is in your control and letting the rest play out. He talks about a learning culture that goes way beyond training programs and communication and is really about behavioral habits that drive results without being overly focused on results. And that's where both people and profitability win. We dive into Doug's success at Aviatrix and his previous company, Splunk, where he led the transition from an on-site software company to a full cloud-based service. It's a great case study for the power of an adaptable, accountable company culture. And Doug has a ton of insight into building a culture that prioritizes learning and growth generally. So please welcome to the podcast, Doug Merritt. Doug, thank you so much for joining us. So what is your why?
Well, thank you for having me here, Jessica. I love your standard format. Great opening question. Dig deep. Now I'm going to ask all of my leaders, what is your why? And my
that's great.
Leadership team.
I do that with candidates, by the way. When I'm interviewing people, that's my first question. What's your why?
It's a great question. I love it.
Yeah.
So I've actually been pretty consistent on this for most of my life. My why is all about learning, growth, and development. I attach deeply to the thought that, and I've worked my entire life on this, by the way, and I've failed at this a lot, but there is no failure. There is no success either, but failure, we tend to gravitate more. There's only learnings. We're here to learn and to experience and to grow. And if you can actually make that happen, you're much more in the moment. You're much more focused on the process, you're focused on daily habits, you're focused on mastery and the small details. And again, lifelong challenge with translating life is about learning, growth, and development to now how do I actually live that every single day? But that is what truly motivates me. And something I'm curious about, because I love your podcast and what you are driving, is what is your why?
Oh, shoot. First time it's ever gotten turned on me. I always have to find a way to say it so that I can talk about me a little bit. Thank you for asking, Doug. My why is to serve God and others.
That's a great one.
It's a good one, right? It's pretty all-encompassing. I mean, it's really hard to forget, too. I like to keep it simple. So can we go back on one thing you said that I actually love and I want to dig into because I think this is solid learning for people out there in the world. You said there is no failure. I totally agree with the premise, but can you tell us, because there are people out there thinking, what do you mean there's no failure? Of course there's failure.
And I'll go one step deeper that I've really been working on. There is no suffering.
Wait, I thought everything is suffering. Life is suffering and there is no failure. I'm not on board with the is no suffering. I suffer.
I know.
Okay, tell us.
So I'm working on it. It's a lifelong, and I'll tie this to what I'm trying to do with business also, because it's part of why I came back to work instead of staying retired. But if you really have that mindset of there is no failure, if life is about learning, if you start there, that God put us here so that we could learn, grow, experience. We're all perfect the way we are, perfectly imperfect. Then you need feedback. The only way you can learn is to get feedback. And celebrating a success or taking too much ego satisfaction out of success robs you of that learning. And having too much regret or being too consumed by failure robs you of the learning. Like if every moment is just an opportunity to learn and to improve and to connect with others and to, again, try and be present, then failure is beautiful. Like it's a feedback loop. It's how else are you going to learn? Our label is failure.
Okay.
I love that. And I went to a self-help seminar when I was 20 years old that taught me that there is no failure, and I've never forgotten it. And the story they told to teach that lesson was, they said, let's say you want to ask a girl out. What do you have at the beginning of that process? You have no date with the girl. Then you ask the girl out and she says no. Have you failed? No, nothing's happened. You still don't have a date with the girl. Right? It's like, let's say you want to take a company to IPO and you don't have a public company, and then you fail to IPO. Well, you still don't have a public company. Nothing's happened, right? But explain that there is no suffering, because it can feel painful if you fail at something that you wanted to happen.
It definitely does. And this is, so there's the contrarian approach that I'm trying to drive, because there's a lot of work we have to do at Aviatrix to achieve some of the goals and outcomes that we want, is trying to release people from the outcomes of the goals and focus on the rigor of daily habits, daily processes, like really be in the moment. And that is insanely controversial. Like, I know that there are huge chunks of our employee population that are like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a sales exec. Like, of course I've got goals and outcomes. Like, if I don't hit my quota, I'm a failure. And right now it's like, well, I want the company to progress also, but if you over rotate on the outcome, you miss the daily learnings. And right now we're in daily learning phase. Like, if you want to climb a mountain, you can't just stare at the peak the entire time. You're going to fall and never achieve your objective. You got to focus on the steps in front of you. And of course the mountain's there and you want to eventually get up the mountain. But the mountain is an outcome of the daily rigor and the focus in the daily process. It doesn't happen without that daily rigor. So there are failures for sure, because we set our mind to, I want to learn to play tennis. I want to take this company public. I want to hit my quota or code this beautiful module within the product. And if you don't achieve it, you didn't achieve it. But that doesn't mean you won't achieve it next time. Going back to the asking the girl out, that doesn't, if you only focus on the outcome and you only focus on failure or success, then again, you've robbed yourself the opportunity of, what was I supposed to learn on this journey? And and then the other piece is, when you do achieve it, like, you set this crazy goal, I'm going to take this company public, and that was your purpose, that was your mission. Unlike serving God and serving others, your mission was, I want to take this company public. Then what? Once you take it public, like, why do you even show up? Or if you don't take it public, you don't. But if your goal going into a sports season is, I want to win the national championship, and halfway through the season you're disqualified, you just haven't won enough games, then what? Like, why does everyone show up to practice? Why do you show up to a game? Why? So it's this nuance that I'm trying to drive within the company of course we have goals. I've got a board. Yeah, we build a plan. We're trying to hit the plan. So we got a plan, but then as soon as you launch, the plan is kind of useless, because everything changes so quickly anyway. And how do you focus back down on the process and the daily habits? And if you do that rigorously enough, you'll get to, I think, an effective outcome. But if learning is the goal, you'll for sure learn.
So Joe Terry and I spent a lot of time talking about this, because we're writing a book that's going to come out later this year. And I mean, my belief, and I think his belief too, is that I'm responsible for the effort, God's responsible for the outcome, right? And when you lead that way, it takes a lot of the pressure off, because I can, Joe's my boss, and every quarter I give him 3 big goals that I want to achieve in the quarter. And I set super high goals for myself, because I know that he's not going to see failure as some kind of personality character defect of mine. He knows that my effort is consistent and it's committed, and the outcome will be what it is, right? Now, the way that shows up in business is really in the interactions I have with Joe when we have conversations about performance and the executive calls. How does it show up beyond just your reactions and conversations? I mean, do you scale that philosophy at Aviatrix?
That's what we are in the process of working on right now.
How do you so where does it start? Where do we begin if that's what we want to do?
So I'll give you an example. We have radically transformed the way that we're going to market. We've got this really interesting software-defined, cloud architected networking platform. So very comprehensive, does the way that networking, connecting something to something else, has been done is generally a box orientation. And there's all these boxes that do different pieces of the whole. So you've got a routing box or a network address translation box or a DNSing box or VPNing box. And the thought process 15, 20 years ago is this is insanity. Like it's a whole. Why don't we have a fabric that does this whole thing? And that's what Aviatrix built for the cloud. But we were trying to sell the whole. We were trying to go into a company and say, we have this very comprehensive platform and you should replace everything you're doing in AWS or Azure or Oracle, OCI or Google with our platform. And it wasn't meeting a ton of success. It was such a big ask of people and there's so much risk involved and it's so complex because the cloud vendors, for better or worse, took a box metaphor for the services they exposed. So they went back to the old data centers with the way that they are creating their offerings. And so we've refactored the entire go-to-market to be use case oriented that brings our platform. So instead of asking a customer, rethink your entire networking architecture, we're now trying to insert in very specific business driven and cybersecurity driven use cases. We don't know how to do that. We haven't done that in 4 or 5 years. So it's a complete relearning orientation within the company. And of course, for that sales motion, we've got goals. We want a certain number of new logos. We want expansions within accounts. But I'm trying to refocus the entire account of, okay, we've got our goals. We're about to set them for our next fiscal year, which starts February 1st. All I care about is daily learnings. So we actually implemented daily stand-ups. So we architected our account executives around a pod. They've got a business development rep attached to them, a systems engineer attached to them, a channel partner attached to them. And by the way, this is so hard. It's such hard work because people resist this. At the end of every single day, beginning of the day, meet with your pod, plan what you're doing. End of the day, meet with your pod, review what worked and didn't work. And then to try and really emphasize it, we're only doing it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we've got daily stand-up reviews where every team is on the call and you're supposed to come forward with, here's what I learned the past 2 days by trying to go to market in this different way. Here's a call that worked. Here's a call that didn't work. We're calling on the wrong buyer. We've got the wrong economic justification. The technical feasibility that we're talking about isn't actually working. Our pricing is off. What's resonating in Germany isn't resonating in the UK, but just try and implement it's just about learning. It's just about learning. If we learn together, we will get a great outcome, but we have to focus on the daily learnings, which is in today's society, I find it really, I think it's always been hard, but we are so distracted with the life around us right now. The news cycle, the constant shifts that it's hard to even gravitate to something long enough to digest it in today's world, I found. And then to have people, it's like sit on the learning, like really go deep on this thing. It's contrarian. It's very contrarian right now.
And so what is the resistance? Do people feel like they're not learning something every day or 2 days, or are they just not wanting to meet twice a day, or what? Why? Or is it just, oh, this is new, I don't like it?
I think it's a combination of all the above. It's rigor. Like we really want you guys to meet every single day and we really want you to talk about it. And so it's an extra step that you have to take. And it really, you have to have low ego. Like you have to come in and admit, like, I don't know the answers. Because I know I don't know the answers. Like we're going to market a new way. And the only way I'm going to learn the answers is by listening to our entire go-to-market team and getting enough repeat insights that's like, okay, here's the pattern, here's how we adjust. And then I think so many people are focused on, like, they do have their monthly goals and their quarterly goals. And it's like all this time, like if you just let me do it my way, I would be able to achieve these goals. And it actually impacts my W-2 or other countries' equivalent of a W-2 and my own feelings of success. And there's also a whole teamwork element of it of, if one of us succeeds, but we're not sharing with everybody else, it's not going to help us. We're all shareholders, right? We've got to work together as a team to understand what is the decoder ring for a velocity motion that we haven't had in a long time.
A decoder ring of a velocity motion. I mean, that is a business jargony sentence right there.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question.
Very.
Did you do this at Splunk?
We were actually trying to at Splunk.
Yeah.
The core mechanism that AWS evangelized is instead of having quarterly business reviews, QBRs, and instead of even being crazy and having monthly business reviews, like get down to weekly business reviews. You're a cloud company, which means you have all this information millisecond by millisecond. Why would we wait to the end of a month or a quarter to look back and learn? Like, why aren't we learning much more frequently? So very counterculture within Splunk because we were not cloud. And my whole journey there was how do we get to be a cloud company? But as we got 50% of new contracts to be cloud oriented, I brought in a couple of AWS leaders along the way. It's like, all right, now we can start this weekly business review, this weekly learning. So it took a while for that to take traction. It was almost a year before it finally got some traction. And then I wound up leaving Splunk, and I'm not sure what actually happened to that approach. But it took us a while here at Aviatrix also. I've been here a year and a half, and I started with, okay, what's our weekly learning mechanism? And then I backed off because it was too much task. And then 3.5 months ago, we gained enough traction on analyzing the company and the markets and what our goals were and how we thought we should operate. And we reinstituted them, and they're beginning to get traction. I've augmented those with this daily stand-up approach. So you try and take it even one level more granular right now.
I would love to dig into the cloud transformation at Splunk as an example of what it looks like to turn a ship that big, that much into a completely different direction, and talk about how culture played a part in that, because I don't think people understand like how much of a behemoth of a task that is. What you did at Splunk was like, it's not like, oh, we're going to, pivot. It's not like a pivot. It's like turning Ford car manufacturing company into SiriusXM. It's like a totally different customer. It's a different product. It's a different way of operating. It's entirely different functions that need to support. And you're doing both at the same time while also transferring. And I mean, I was at Oracle for 10 years, and I was there for that Oracle journey, right? When I invented the culture equation, actually, I was working for Sean Price, who was the head of cloud, the guy that Mark Hurd brought in to create a company that was a cloud DNA company out of non-cloud DNA, basically. So can you talk about the beginning of Splunk, and you have this vision, like what percentage of your revenue was cloud at the beginning versus at the end, and how did culture play a part in facilitating that transformation?
Yeah, culture was critical, and it's so nice to have someone that's gone through it because most people do not understand how insanely disruptive it is. But when I joined Splunk, there was zero cloud. There had been an attempt to create a cloud delivery with brand new code before I got there, and it didn't wind up working. And the awesome leader that was CEO that brought me in, Godfrey Sullivan, had killed that entirely and said, until we have a different approach, we're gonna punt, and we'll just keep selling on-prem customer, the traditional software. And then by the time I got to be CEO, he had reoriented. He had begun the approach of, all right, we'll just take our current code the way it is and throw it in the cloud and do self-manage. We'll manage it on an individual by individual business basis for the customer base. So I took over. It was 0.25% maybe. And we're going to finish that year a little bit over $600 million in revenue, which as we took the cloud journey, annual recurring revenue turned out to be about a third of perpetual license. So that would have been about $200 million of ARR, but that was all on-prem license. And over 6.5 years, we went to almost 60% of bookings being from cloud and almost 30% of revenue being from cloud. And it was for sure the propellant for the company because the cloud growth way outpaced the on-prem growth.
So let's break it down before you dig in, right? So you're at the beginning of the journey, and your employees start hearing, we're going to start doing this cloud thing. And what they experience is, well, wait a minute, are my skills going to be out of date? Am I going to get replaced? Will my job even exist? Because a lot of jobs stop existing, right? And the fear that puts into the hearts and minds. And you're seeing this with every company everywhere with AI, right? What is AI going to do to my job, right? It's that equivalent, but 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So how do you address the fear while painting a picture of a vision for the future that is in the company's best interest, but employees can see, well, I don't know anything about that. And so I may not belong for this world. So I don't want this to succeed. Where do you start when you have that challenge?
So we actually started it, my interview cycle with the board, because I went through, they had external candidates and then I was the internal candidate. Really centered, I put together a whole PowerPoint presentation on, hey, this is what you get if you get me. We're going to make this company a cloud company for this whole host of reasons. And the foundational reason was we had just seen our biggest customers get to a petabyte of data per day that they were ingesting and managing, which for the listeners is a ridiculous amount of data. And it's very, very complex to be able to manage the infrastructure, even in the cloud, to be able to deal with that volume. And so when I looked at, these were the top tech companies that were doing that, the top investment banking companies that have infinite talent. It's like the average company will never be able to manage this. If we believe that our mission, that data is one of the most important elements for survivability and decision making in the future, we've got to make it easy for the average customer to be able to manage this data, which means we're going to have to manage it for them. So we've got to get to the cloud. And then there was all kinds of, as you experienced Oracle, there's a whole host of other benefits. Revenue is much more predictable. You get much more continuous customer integration and contacts. You can update things much more quickly. There's a list of 1,000 things. We started with a high level mission. And I got board buy-in. Like when I said, if you don't choose me, I love this company, count me in, I'll work for whoever you choose. But if you do choose me, we're going to basically throw a public company up into the air and see if we can put it back together. And it might not actually get put back together. And they voted for that at the time. So that helped from the board down. And then I had to get the entire executive team on board. And I swap out a reasonable chunk of the executive team on what is the plan. And we took almost 9 months to interrogate all the aspects of the business. And again, plans you need them to know where you're going, but then we probably followed 30% of the plan because we found there are so many things that we thought that we knew that we didn't know as we went along the way. But I wouldn't have done it without the plan. But it was everything from what IT systems have to change to what do we have to do as far as skills and culture? What kind of people do we need, and what kind of backgrounds we have to recruit from, and everything in between. And being a public company, I would not recommend this for most executives. As a public company CEO, I think it just adds multiplies the complexity by 10. Because if you're smaller like Splunk and you only have one revenue line, unlike Oracle, which had a whole bunch of different revenue lines, the disruption that the investors are going to feel, which then means all the employees feel because it generally hits the stock price, is pretty dramatic because you're turning the revenue and the cost and the cash flow structures upside down. But so we had a plan, and I made sure that as we brought in new ELT members, that we translated that plan. We had a great CHRO into what is this going to look like across the company. And we wound up, and we had to brace for it, we wound up losing close to 25% of people through that first 18 months. And it started with engineering because they felt it first, because we were asking them to develop in a very different way. But ultimately, all the way down to the sales force, there's a different set of skills as you got to experience with that type of company. But because we took a 5-year horizon on that plan, that we had time to really think through to pace the change. And again, we made so many mistakes, and there are so many things that we do differently. But the one thing that we didn't waver from was, if we want to serve our customers and we want to really help build a lasting company, we have to get through this transition, and there is no reversing. And once we got to the 50% mark of the contracts, that helped.
Yeah. So I remember Sean in a conversation with his team when there was resistance. He basically just said, get on board or get out. I mean, it's time to agree or attrit, right? I mean, did you have those moments?
We did, but they happen at different times through the org. Because so if I think about sales was one of the last that really had that call to action because they could still sell the on-prem product.
Right.
And, by the time I left, we were still selling it. It just kept reducing its percentage of the quarterly composition. So they had time to wrap their heads around it. And we had, again, reasonable attrition for a multitude of reasons. I think this was one of the core reasons is it was a very different way of selling and a different way of getting compensation and compensated, et cetera. Engineering was the first. That was
right.
Because we were asking them to develop in a completely different way. And a lot like we're doing Aviatrix, we took the decision that we're going to have a single line of code and then abstract different elements of it for the cloud so that we could have an on-prem version that was current and have a cloud version, but they had a very different look and feel, and a whole host of characteristics to them that were different.
Yeah, engineering was first, and then consulting, like the implementation consultants, because they kind of saw the writing on the wall that they will go away.
Yes,
right?
They could, yeah.
Well, they did.
They wound up not really going away for us, but what they did change a lot because so much
now they're what like adoption consultants or.
It was a lot. We went from a deep technical presence within an account. How do you actually even implement the core Splunk platform? And what are you doing with all the very unique command line driven configurations, and to much more, what is the set of use cases you're trying to implement? And what are the implementation structures more from a day in the life? How do you want the feel of the app to be structured, and how do you want to integrate with other components? But yeah, the technical swap out was pretty dramatic because you no longer had to be deep in the speeds and the feeds of the innards of the database.
And that reminds me of the other big transformation is you go from speaking the language of the product to the language of the customer, right? I mean, you had to kind of zoom out and now talk about, it was a very different language and a different actual customer, right? And that requires a whole different skill set.
Yes.
Some people were not comfortable with, so there's the upskilling. Let's go back to your passion for learning, right? There's how do you figure out who's going to get upskilled, who's going to get moved out, who's going to, and how do you upskill as you're doing two things at once? What was that journey like? Was that,
If I just key on your last piece, which is I was on a call literally before this with an exec at one of our partners who said because Aviatrix has been customer self-managed, and now we've got our platform as a service version that we just announced at reInvent a few weeks ago. She said, did you do it yourself, and would you have wanted a partner to do it for you? And I said, I would never want a partner to do this for me because I need, beginning with the engineering team, but all the way through, I need our company to walk a mile in the customer's shoes. Like the true benefit for me of SaaS or all of its iterations is you don't create something and throw it at the wall and then kind of theorize what the CIO and his or her staff might be dealing with. Like you own it, you live it every single day. You're an end user. So every aspect now you've got to own the cost of implementation, what resources it utilizes, how does the UI work, how quickly is it up and running, how do you do a patch? Like it radically transforms your thinking. So that is the foundation. And what I love about it is it's so customer centric. You're in the shoes of the customer. And then for the employee base, I've found that it's really difficult to forecast who's going to react how.
Yeah.
What we did set up.
It's hard to assess who's currently reacting that way because information like that doesn't trickle up, right?
No, it's definitely bottoms up, and you've got to experience it. And I was constantly surprised from an exec or a mid-level manager or an individual contributor I knew. It's like, oh yeah, they're not going to make this cut at all. Like they don't get it. And some of them resisted for a while, like. Change is hard for humans, but then they started experiencing it's like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And they just dove in and started taking classes on the side. And we had a bunch of classes and we want to taking a key off of Microsoft and Satya and implementing Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset as part of our onboarding. And I had my leadership principles to try to emphasize that. But some people really gravitated, and other people that I thought were really learning oriented just self-selected out. And
yeah,
so it's hard to determine. I think you can create the signals, the mechanisms within a company on like who's really going back to our daily stand-ups, who's really leaning in and who's not. And you can see if you've got enough touch points and you you really incentivize your first line, second line managers on going deep with their teams and doing their job, which is not to be the expert that they used to do, but to actually be a people manager, to actually be a mentor, to be someone that helps with learning and development. Then you can help them with the signals on and the confidence that someone is not going to make the transition, and it's okay. It's not going back to there are no failures. It's not bad. Like we can hug and thank each other for the time together, and just agree that this is not a fun environment for you. Like you're ready for something else. You're not embracing it. But you've got to make that call. And the hardest part that I've had in my career is how do you get better at making those judgments quicker versus being conflict avoidant and or being too empathetic and waiting too long. And trying to find that line is so hard also.
Joe Terry is actually remarkably good at that. I don't know how he does it, but I mean, the other day I was on LinkedIn, someone that he let go wrote this love letter to Joe 3 months after he was let go. And it was remarkable because, I mean, it's really just Joe having a conversation, and he's done this multiple times since I've been here, where he says, it doesn't seem like you really love what you're doing right now. Is that right? What do you really want to do? How can we help you get there? Looks like this isn't really a fit anymore. Let me help you. And people leave with smiles on their faces because they've been seen, and it's not some bizarre loyalty pretend dynamic where, wait a minute, it's not okay for me to say I don't like it here or for you to say that you don't think I'm happy here. It's just authenticity. It's transparency that I think is often missing,
I agree. That's it. It's something that I really want Aviatrix to become expert at because I believe it in my soul. Like again, if we're all here for learning and growth, like this might not be your learning moment. Like you chose it at one point in time. And as you go through it, you get to the point, it's like, this isn't the right role. I thought I really want to be in engineering, and I find I don't like engineering. Awesome. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, thank you. Like, we'll help you recognize that. How do we help you? Is there something internally? Is there something externally? But if you go back to there are no failures, like, it's our duty to help people get more and more self-aware and to get more and more comfortable with themselves, to try and breed positive self-love, not the egotistical, but I'm a good person. I'm here for a reason. I'm okay being perfectly imperfect. And if you can get there, then it really is just what I've really found through the years is if you have that honest conversation, 99 out of 100 times, you go back 2 or 3 years later and they will thank you. It's like, you know what? Even if I didn't agree with it at the time, you saw it, you were right. I wasn't at the right company, or I wasn't in the right role, or I wasn't at the right level. And I'm so glad you did that. I do have the 1 out of 100, where it's like, they're still bitter and upset and they felt like it wasn't their choice but I'll take those odds anytime.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing, I've never used this language for it, but it's something I've always felt in my bones, that there's corporations, they're really a construct of our imagination, if you think about it, right? In reality,
Yes,
they don't really exist, right? And yet they are the things that we clock into and clock out of and get our paycheck from. So in another lens of the world, they do exist. And what I do for my own career, and it makes me feel sane because I can look at corporations as, as this entity that is to be judged, right? But when I look at it differently, what I realize is, okay, I got to wake up and do something all day. I might as well use this sandbox as a playground for experimenting with my own personal growth and learnings and interactions and humanity, right? This is where I'm going to do it all day long, and instead of over here. And I kind of pick the sandbox I want to be in, as opposed to being so identified and attached to the idea that I'm the chief strategy officer at Culture Partners, which is owned by HKW. It's like, who cares about all that, right? What I really care about is what's going on with me and Joe today. And like, when we have an interaction, are we mad at each other? Like, is he mad at me? Like, that kind of thing is much more interesting to me. And then to learn and to talk about stuff becomes this whole other lens for me that I still haven't quite figured it out. Maybe that's like a third dimension, right?
I couldn't agree more. Yuval Harari does a really good job in many of his books, but Sapiens, on like these countries, companies, like they're all figments of our imagination, but they help us as a species. Like we wouldn't, when you realize that you're abroad and you're American and you see another American, like there's an affinity and you actually get along with each other. And so they're good and they're bad, but they're fake. I experienced that the first time when I went to this company, SAP. It's the biggest tech employer in Southern Germany. And so if you come in, you wind up staying there usually for a really long time. And Silicon Valley, you typically do 2, 3, 4, 5 years at a company and then go to the next company, usually with the same group of people. If you're a good networker and you do good jobs, you get dragged along. And I came in at a pretty senior level, and the SAP people are like, man, I don't get you at all. Like, why do you guys, one, you're with Oracle and they suck. They're the worst company ever. And SAP is so much better. And why do you guys keep popping? It's like, no, you don't get it. Like I work for Silicon Valley Inc. You work for SAP Inc., which is like Silicon Valley Inc. Like it's the only game in Heidelberg and Waldorf. And, but I really believe that going back to Aviatrix, like we're intersected for a point in time. Right? There's no way I'm going to be here, I don't believe, until I die, unless something tragic happens I'm not expecting. I don't expect you to be here till you die. So we're here together at the moment. How do we help each other the best? Like my obligation is help you learn and progress as much as possible to the best work you can do, because you're going to go somewhere else. And like, I just want our time together to be as fruitful for you as humanly possible. I want you to look back and say, that was awesome. I learned a ton. I met great folks. But we just can't take this ownership orientation because, one, it's fake. and it goes against what's really happening in the world, which is I love the individual accountability. Like we're all accountable for our own lives, our own brands, and own that. Right? And especially in 2025, like, geez, there's so many tools to be like, as you said, I control the effort, God controls the outcome. Like the one thing I can't manufacture is your will and excitement. But I can help with a lot. Like I can help create the right environment, but man, you got to show up with the will. Yeah,
totally. And it's interesting. I was listening to Joe Rogan this weekend, and he's made this great line, which was, people suck at power. And I turned that into a newsletter. It'll come out tomorrow or the next day, which is, I think sometimes the more powerful you become in your imaginary system, right? Whether it's the CEO or board or investor or whatever, politician, religious figure, it's everywhere. You end up wanting to identify with the power because it boosts your ego, right? The more power you have, the more important you are. And that self-importance builds self-esteem, and it feels good. And it's the short-term, neuron firing, winning feeling. So you're like, yeah, this is really important. And so I think it's harder. I just find this, like, it's a lot easier to have this conversation with someone who has no power, who's like, yeah, totally, it's all make-believe, as opposed to a CEO, which is why this conversation is refreshing, where you have the quote power, right? But you're also aware of perspective of what's really going on and how we can all grow together, which I really appreciate. So Splunk ended, you retire, or was it ever really a retirement? I mean, did you change your mind about retirement?
I told myself it was retirement. I'm not sure if I ever believed it.
Okay.
But it was going back to, it's great to have these philosophies. But 2 months after my exit from Splunk, when all the emails stopped and I wasn't speaking in front of large groups, and there was a dislocation of, oh, wow, like I actually like that. Like I was attached to that. So there was a whole process. But one of the things I found is I had no idea how fried I was. My cortisol levels were completely out of whack. My health checks had ex-triathlete and very, very disciplined about things. And my blood work wasn't good. And it's just like, I actually love my family and I've been fortunate. I've done pretty well. Like, why don't I just focus on being a great dad and a great husband and get back, focus on my health, and I'll advise, and I'll help out, and this will be great. And a year and a half in, I've realized it doesn't work for me. I wish it did sometimes, but I love being part of a team. I love being in the mix. Right? There's something different when you're committed to a mission. And for me, that mission still is, I've got to eventually figure out what it's going to be outside of a work or corporate structure, but it still is being on the battlefield with your engineers, with your sales reps, with your marketing team, with your HR team, just every single day, trying to serve the employees, serve the customers. I really missed my tribe. I had my friends and my family, but it's different than the 8 or 10 or 12 hours that you get when you're inside of something a little bit more purposeful. So,
yeah. Well, I think we as humans want to be useful. Yes. Being useful feels good. And so when we're feeling useless, it doesn't feel good, right? So, okay. So when you get to the CEO level, does industry experience matter nearly as much as it seems like it should, or does it not? Is it really just about how you manage people and lead a team? Or, because I was listening to the podcast, your Aviatrix podcast that you were a guest on the first time, and you guys were nerding out about the tech. And the guy said, which surprised me towards the end, like, oh, well, you must have been really confused because you didn't have network experience. Like, it must have been so hard. And I was thinking, no, I don't think it would have been that hard for him because, he's been a tech guy his entire life, right? Network is just another thing. It's just another version of working on this in this world, right? Was it hard, or is it really not that hard when you get to the CEO level?
I think at the 10,000 foot level, it really is about being an excellent people manager, people mentor, leader. I think it translates across industries, as Ted Lasso tried to show us. One of my favorite shows ever.
I know. I heard in that episode that you were a super fan of Ted Lasso.
Yeah, I need to meet Jason at some point in time. But I do think industry experience matters. I took your perspective, which is I've been in tech my whole life. Ever since I graduated from college and I got my first job at Accenture, I played in very different levels of the stack. And I barely been in networking, but I've been at the operating system level. I've been at the core development tools level and systems management level. I've been at the apps level. And you have to have an awareness of how the rest of the technology stack works and what data centers look like. And you don't have to. I loved it. And so I went deep on it. So there was a ramp. And for 6 months, I was definitely voraciously reading and podcasting and YouTubing on going back and beginning of my CCIE Cisco courses, like really where we come from. And so I think it makes sense to learn. But if you took me out of tech and planted me in the movie industry or planted me in consumer food and beverage, I think it'd be hard. A really good leader could probably make it. It depends how loaded the situation is. But I think that there's a lot of benefit. I've looked at there's 3 legs of the stool as far as how dangerous is the change. Have you done the role before? Do you actually understand the industry? And then what was my 3rd leg? I can't believe I'm blanking.
But you just said 3.
Yeah.
How dangerous is it?
Well, if you change more than one of the legs, I can't.
Oh.
I'm going way back in time.
How dangerous is it? Is the 3 legs? I got it.
Yeah, is the risk that you have. Maybe the 3rd one is buying center. That was like a 30-year-old framework. But so if you've done the CEO role before and you've done it in tech and it's going to be networking, you can probably survive. If you've done the CEO role before and you've never been in an industry and it's a brand new, you've got the CEO capability, but not the rest of the surrounding capability, you have a chance. But I
see what you're saying. There's the industry, there's the role, and then there's
my mythical third thing that I'll figure out.
Right. Well, we won't use this clip for social media because it's like, oh, there's a third one. Whatever, look it up.
I'm not even sure I've ever talked about it, but I had that framework because I went from coding to sales to back to engineering to marketing to ProServe, and I changed aspects of the industry. And I was trying to figure out, like, can I actually do this or not? And so it was firm in my mind 25 years ago. But
do you have imposter syndrome? Like today, do you have imposter syndrome sometimes?
Sometimes.
Not that much?
I think a lot less now, because it goes back to maybe learning is all that matters is one of those survival instincts.
Yeah.
And I'm an amazing learner. I love learning. And I think I've earned a lot of experience now by doing multiple different roles. But I remember distinctly from my entire tenure at SAP, wondering every day if my badge is going to work or not. So that was extreme imposter syndrome because I wasn't German. I didn't come up through the engineering ranks. It was a very tight culture there, and I was an outsider. And Germany is a very craftsman orientation, which is, I think, an awesome, noble thing. Like we should have more vocational school here. But I didn't come up through that guild. So it's like, what am I doing here? I'm a really good people manager. I understand Silicon Valley. I know I'm adding value, but I think it cut me off at any point in time. And luckily my badge always worked, but I've had periods of imposter syndrome.
So let me take you back to the thing that I've been wrestling with for years, which is this, I believe your philosophy of leadership, that if we can focus on the learnings and just focus on the effort, the daily effort that I put in, how can I be of use? How can I be committed to the mission? How can I be expansive in my thinking so that I can take risks and fail and learn and continue? And I let God be responsible for the outcome. I believe that would create worry-free workplaces if we really lived and breathed that way of thinking, where people would be way less stressed. Your cortisol levels as a CEO would go down. People would feel less burnout because we would all know we're committed to the mission and the work, and the outcome is going to be what it is. I mean, right? How do you create a business case for that, though? Because in a public company with those, we talked about this a little bit, but what is the argument to the investors that this is the right way to be? Because the investors I talk to say, but are you going to get to the EBITDA number or not? Right? They're very outcome focused.
They are. So one, I picked a private company on purpose.
Right.
Because public was an option. Because I really, really wanted, I came back to be part of, to find my tribe and to really work on this. How do you create an unparalleled employee experience? And part of that in my mind was you've got to release the outcome. And there's the two aspects to it. You control the effort, but that controlling the effort means you also control the rate of learning every day. If you just go back to, I'm a sports junkie, so I always do sports metaphors. Steph Curry and LeBron James and the great basketball players still do dribbling drills every day, footwork drills every day, free throw drills every day. But they don't just do them. They've got people observing them, and they still are making micro fine tunings, and it's an engaged learning experience. So I don't just want you to show up. I want you to show up and learn and iterate and improve, which then changes relationship with first line manager. As a first line manager, your job is to be that dribbling coach. Like, you better be a pretty gosh darn good dribbler, because you're going to be really helping that person make sure that they're working on all their skills so that they can be as effective as they need to be in that discipline. But the experimentation that I want to drive is, if you have this learning culture and you really create it systemically across the company, there is incremental improvement every day, and you can measure that improvement. And would that be enough? like as we begin to tie that daily activity incremental improvement to the end of a week outcome, to the end of a month outcome, the end of a quarter outcome, how much of a tie is there? And how does that relate to employee satisfaction, employee confidence, turnover rates, career advancement, overall skill delivery within any mastery within a domain? And I'm not sure how it ends. I mean, what I've seen in corporate America is I went back and listened to your interview with the CEO of IKEA, which I've been fascinated with the way Europeans run companies since my SAP days, is that you can get short-term results for sure, the way that we do it in America, but the longevity rate of Fortune 500 companies is abysmal. Like and it's really different than Europe. Like you've got these companies that have been around for 80, 120, 140 years, and they keep reinventing themselves. There still are failures in Europe as well, and they've got their own problems there. But there's a different focus. There's more long-term thinking there, and this is really a long-term thinking. It's very contrarian. I've viewed myself as a counterbalance in life. Often, I almost always take the opposing perspective, and this is a counterbalance orientation, which was Splunk also. Like, why would you ever want to transform a company in public markets from one way of living and one way of counting things to another? But I love that. That goes back to learning and growth and the hard thing about hard things. I really wanted to code this of, can you help people take a longer term view, but in a way that doesn't totally freak them out in the short term, that they eventually abandon everything and go back to the thing that works, which ultimately creates a deflationary outcome at some point in time.
It's almost like what you're describing is that in order to take the long-term view, we have to take the micro view, the day-to-day view. And your metaphor with the basketball dribbling was perfect, because what it shows me is if we focus on the feedback loop of a team that trusts itself to grow and learn on a day-to-day basis, we can create growth faster, which will ultimately lead to outcomes. But the resistance comes from the ego. Steph Curry has to be willing to get feedback and to be told you did that wrong, right?
Yep.
And Steph Curry now, okay, but Steph Curry at the beginning of his career needed to be okay with that. Then when you don't have the validity of the success to bolster your ego. So that's the impossible part. How do you overcome the ego? Because as enlightened as I like to pretend I am, I hate getting feedback. I mean, it makes me feel like I failed, right? I am not living the thing that we were talking about. I'm very sensitive. So lots of people are sensitive though. So how do you overcome the ego of, well, that makes me feel bad. I don't know that you have my best interest at heart, you know?
Let's experiment on this together and see. I am partnering with some folks to try and help on this. That we can go into a different point in time, but it really is. I think there's a hiring orientation of how do you filter for grittiness and tenacity and learning orientation and excitement about learning and getting feedback. But then I think you've got to create a system, right? It's got to be that if they're without the feedback, the whole thing doesn't work. And that's what I saw as Splunk went to the cloud is, wow, there's so much data. Like, why aren't we going back every day, every week and looking at the data and seeing what did we get right and what didn't we get right? And how do we learn? How do we tune? And I think with Gen AI, the data is just going to get ridiculous. It's again, people don't know what to do with it. Gen AI will help because it will know what to do with it. But we have so much information available if we're willing to actually use it. But you need the people that are excited and willing to participate in the system. But through our lives, right, through college or high school, through any sports team, like you're forced to get feedback. Right? You take practice quizzes, you take exams, you go to practice every single day, and there's game tape and practice tape, and you have nightly sessions of analyzing it. And then why, when we get to the workplace, is it all thrown out the window? It's like, oh, you'll figure it out. You don't need that. You don't need that anymore.
Well, it's funny because our culture consulting system involves a ton of feedback. And I mean, most of the work we do is reminding people and encouraging more feedback give and take, because there's so much resistance to it. And even in our company, we could do it more than we do, because that it's just a natural. There's also these dynamics, right? The politics of work is, well, wait a minute. Are you just trying to make me look bad? Do you just not buy into what I'm doing because you have a different worldview and you're in that group, and that group blames us for this? And, the corporate politics. So it's interesting where it kind of comes back to is you do need trust. You need the kumbaya circle. You need people to get together for team building so that they look each other in the eye and say, okay, actually, you're a good dude. We had a drink last night and you told me about your wife. And now I feel like you're more of a human rather than a sales rep, the title that you hold. So maybe it is kumbaya after all.
And you need a ton of org clarity, because what you really should be giving feedback on is, again, I'm a business development rep and my job is outbound prospecting and qualification. Like, what does that look like? So what are the true details of the job, and then what is expected of you on a daily basis, and then feedback on what makes a good set of interactions, what makes a good prompt, what makes a good workflow, we're going back to, you need that dribbling coach, you need the first line, the manager of those teams to buy into crafting that org clarity and the daily discipline of activities. And then again, we can augment that with third-party consultants and helpers for folks, because it's a journey. But if you can disassociate, it's not an opinion, it's legitimate feedback. Like, we're both on the Gong call, and our recommendation, everyone's recommendation is, you might have taken this turn. Do you agree that could work? Go try that. Like, and again, we could be wrong, but why don't you try that different approach and see if you get better results? But I think if we were able to take that disciplined approach and disassociate the interpretation, which it comes with a lot of the politics, to the actual activity. Like, there is some proof that dribbling a certain way and a certain rate and hand speed exchange is effective. Again, there's not a perfect translation from sports to work, but I think we can do better translation.
Yeah, well, and there's not only the feedback, the politics of it that creates resistance, but also people's personal backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
If you grew up with a dad that was always criticizing you, you're probably not going to like feedback as much as someone who had a super uplifting household. And that's the invisible part of it that we never see, right? We have seen studies that show that people who have depression and anxiety are much more likely to receive feedback poorly than people who don't. And so what we see, without knowing the diagnosis, knowing people's personal lives, is we see someone react poorly and we think, how unprofessional. And there isn't the understanding and the empathy, which there can't be, because it is like a chicken and the egg. I've been frustrated with the HR world saying, bring your authentic selves to work, tell us everything about you, be super vulnerable, but we haven't equipped the leaders to receive that information with equanimity, right? Then people judge, well, wait a minute, you've got a problem? Well, then I see you as different, right? Yeah. And so the unconscious bias can perpetuate the differences. And anyway, we are people. We are people doing work. We're people. We're people doing work, and it's about the effort, not the outcome. I think that's great. You're like the first CEO I've talked to, other than Joe Terry, who actually feels like they live and breathe this. Do you come across others?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, that's probably why you love Joe Terry, or Joe Terry loves you, because it's rare to come across that. Maybe Dan Streetman too. I don't know. Dan is very outcome oriented, but he's good. He has integrity, right?
And it's that fine line of, like, I'm super hard on myself. I'm very competitive. I expect a lot from myself, and that translates to other people. Like, I've got very strong ambitions for this company. I'm just trying to translate that to, we're going to get there using this approach
through the back door. It's a backdoor approach to results rather than just drive, which turns everyone off and exhausts the person driving those results.
That was my biggest lesson at Splunk. One of my biggest lessons is we had such ambitious goals, and we focused on the outcome way too much. Again, in the public markets, a lot going on there, but we burnt a lot of people out. And again, it was super successful. Like, it was my favorite 8 years of my career, and I'm proud of what the company did. But looking back, it's like, we may have gotten the same results if we took a different approach. and had more, even had a better culture. And I was proud of the culture there, but I think there are ways we could have enhanced it. So we get to run the experiment again, see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. I have one last question, which is, what is something that you don't get asked about very often that you wish you were asked more often in these types of interviews?
I thought I had thought a lot about that, and I did not. It was so dependent upon how the conversation went. And you went deep on my passion areas. My standard answer is, I wish that people asked a little bit more, like, how do I see the world of work? And do I think that there's a different way to drive effective capitalist outcomes and still honor and grow people? And why do I think that? And because that's what I don't find that often. There's a lot of lip service to my people are my most important asset. Like, what CEO does not say that? And then in reality, you look at the company and the first sign of anything, they start chopping their people but that is like, what is the difference between someone that is trying to live that and someone that is giving a good interview?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's almost so obvious to me when it's one versus the other. I mean, everyone says people first, right? And I think HR in particular, HR thought leaders, HR experts, they really lean into that. And but they go so hard that they forget about the business necessity of, creating outcomes. And so then it's all soft, and then they lose all credibility. So then the CEOs that could be listening to them aren't, because it's like, well, you're not getting that we have to get both, right? It can't just be one or the other. How did you come, I'm going to ask one last follow-up question, even though I never do. How did you come to this philosophy? I mean, like, where does this come from in you?
So I had a unusual childhood. We moved sometimes twice in 1 year, and often every year until high school, when I staged a mini revolt, and my mom actually listened, and we stayed for all 4 years, which was great. But a lot of my lessons from my youth were the opposite of what I'm talking about. If you don't like it, just leave and change it. If you didn't like the outcome, lie about it or cover it up. And through the years, I've done a ton of work, a lot of therapy bills on what does integrity mean to me, and why am I really here on this planet, and what do I really value and care about? And it is God and people and connections and helping others. And the more that I got the opportunity to lead people, the more that began to really sink in with me. And I'm very critical in every engagement. And I was super self-critical as Splunk. It's like, God, why couldn't I do better? Which I think I ultimately came back is you don't get to go deep when you're an advisor or a board member or investor. You're not supposed to. I don't think you should. You can only go deep if you're on the field with a team. And I'm not done. I'm really fascinated by how do we create a empowering and liberating and learning oriented environment with high accountability. Like, if you're not pulling your weight, like, you're not here. I refuse to call you family. You're a teammate.
Right.
You're a teammate.
Right.
And you've got to show up with your will, and you've got to be learning oriented. And if you're not, like, again, we'll hug and I'll help direct you somewhere else, but you're not going to be on the team. So it's that interesting duality of high accountability, but try and do it differently.
But I don't think it's a duality, because I think there's nothing more spiritually enlightened than taking accountability, right? To make a personal choice, to focus on what you can control. That is ultimate, effort focus. It's like, I'm just going to, instead of blaming and, the pointing fingers, I'm going to take responsibility for my entity here, and I'm going to do something, and I'm going to put in an effort and be useful, So that also answers why you said, that's also why you said there's no suffering, because it is the suffering that led you to the insight to where you are now, right? And it's without the suffering, you probably would be another tech bro, you know?
Yes. No, you're right. Like it's again, I just don't know how you learn without it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I just signed up to volunteer for this hospice program, and I was doing the orientation. Everyone in the room lost someone, you know, every single person. And it's in that suffering that they said, well, how can I be of service to someone who's going through something painful? And here we are. It's actually the grief and the suffering was the superpower that got people to show up, you know? So I totally get it. You just made 10 million things in my brain click that I've been trying to make click for about 2.5 years. So this has been one of my favorite interviews. Thank you so much for coming and for being who you are.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm curious how you selected me, but we'll talk about that some other time.
Okay, I certainly will let you know.
It'd be great to continue our conversation outside of this.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Absolutely. This has been so great. Thank you, Doug.